Well, Turkmenistan's infamous gateway to hell. It's a giant gas crater known for its uncontrollable red flames is losing its fire.
For over 50 years, a massive fiery pit has burned endlessly in the heart of Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert. Known to locals and thrill-seeking tourists as the door to hell, this crater has belched flames, gas, and heat since the Soviet era. But now, something has changed. Officials have decided to shut it down, and the United States may be involved. Why now? What are they trying to hide? And what's rising from below the surface? From Cold War secrets to terrifying scientific discoveries, the truth behind the burning pit is far darker than you think. A fire that wouldn't die. In the heart of Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert, a massive crater gapes open in the earth, its rim scorched and glowing. For over half a century, it has burned without pause, day and night, summer and winter, through sandstorms and silence. Locals call it the door to hell. But to scientists, it's known by a more sterile name, the Darvaza gas crater. Measuring nearly 200 feet wide and 65 feet deep, this pit of fire isn't a natural wonder. It's man-made. A mistake. A wound in the earth that was never meant to last. Yet somehow, it refuses to die. The story begins in 1971, in the thick of the Cold War, when Soviet engineers were conducting exploratory drilling for oil and gas. The vast desert held rich reserves of natural gas, an invaluable resource for the USSR's expanding energy empire. So, a rig was set up, drills punched through the crust, and early readings seemed promising. But then, without warning, the ground collapsed. The drilling platform gave way into a massive underground cavern, swallowing equipment and tearing open the Earth's surface. What the Soviets had stumbled upon was a huge pressurized pocket of natural gas, a potentially lethal one. Methane began to leak rapidly into the atmosphere, raising the risk of explosion or poisoning. The engineers needed a solution, and fast. In what now seems like a reckless decision, they chose to ignite the gas. Their reasoning was simple: burn off the methane, neutralize the danger, and move on. They estimated the fire would last a few days, a week at most. But the gas didn't stop. The flames kept burning, and what started as a quick fix became an uncontrollable, open wound in the desert floor. For years, the Darvaza crater burned in relative obscurity. The Soviet Union never made much noise about it. After the USSR collapsed, Turkmenistan gained independence, and the fire kept burning, untouched, unmanaged, and largely forgotten by the outside world. But it didn't stay forgotten forever. Images of the crater were scattered all over the net circa the early 2000s. The pictures turned unreal, flames emitted from the very earth, illuminating the surrounding land with a hellish glow that could be seen from miles away. Tourists began arriving, braving the dry heat of the desert just to see it. Scientists were curious too and wanted to know how a fire of this kind had been burning for decades. The crater evolved into a mystique over time. Some legends followed. Some said it was cursed. Others told the tale of a Soviet experiment gone wrong, or worse, of something that was purposely created to contain an underground anomaly. In 2010, the site was inspected personally by Turkmenistan's president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedov. He briefly ordered a shutdown of the site over environmental concerns, while the flames continued to burn on. In 2019, he went a step further and drove in circles around the crater in a rally car, proclaiming it a national treasure, before suggesting once again that the flames should be extinguished. But nothing was seriously done about putting it out. The Darvaza crater was not simply an unusual thing in and of itself, characterized by its very old age. It existed in some degree of harmony with unusual and unruly times. Attempts to extinguish similar gas leaks elsewhere worked routinely, This one? The flames weren't put down. Instead, they danced higher, as if mocking any attempts to stop them. And yet, amid all of this lurked the question, what really is down there, under that flame? A full survey of the chamber was never done. Nobody ever really checked just how big the gas pocket was or what more could be underneath it. For, above ground, the flames blazed on, but what lay deep inside remained an unknowable mystery. But the story of how they tried to shut it down reveals that the crater's fire may have been hiding more than just gas. The real reason they lit the pit. The official story is simple. In 1971, a Soviet drilling rig punched through a gas pocket in the Karakum Desert. The ground collapsed. Methane poured out. Fearing a catastrophic explosion or mass poisoning, the engineers decided to ignite the gas, assuming it would burn off in a few days. Problem solved. But when you dig deeper, that explanation starts to unravel. First, there's no official Soviet record confirming exactly when or why the crater was lit. The timeline is murky. Some reports claim the ignition happened immediately after the collapse. Others suggest it took weeks or even months. There's not even agreement on who made the call. This lack of documentation is suspicious, especially considering how meticulous Soviet-era records usually were. Second, geologists today agree. Setting fire to a methane crater is not standard practice. In fact, it's dangerous. It releases toxic gases, pollutes the atmosphere, and doesn't guarantee safety. Safer and more common methods include sealing the crater or venting the gas with controlled pipelines. But the Soviets didn't choose either of those options. They chose fire, a decision that makes far less sense the more you examine it. So why did they light it? One theory suggests the fire was a distraction, that the collapse revealed more than just gas, that it may have exposed something the Soviets didn't want leaking into the public eye. Perhaps a secret chamber, a classified facility, or even geological data tied to early Cold War experiments. Igniting the gas created a perfect cover, a fiery inferno that would make further exploration too dangerous and keep curious eyes away. There's also speculation that the area had been used for chemical or biological testing. Soviet scientists were known to conduct secret experiments in remote regions across the USSR, deserts, tundras, and mountain caves, places with low population and high strategic value. The Karakum Desert fits that profile perfectly. Could the burning crater have been a convenient way to destroy or obscure something buried beneath? Another theory suggests that fear was the main cause. Seismic readings associated with the collapse might have indicated an emergency. In the early 1970s, the entire world was jittery about underground nuclear activity. Anything that shakes can be misconstrued to be a foreign threat. It might have ignited the gas out of panic to control levels of pressure, or to preemption against alarm from Western monitoring stations. The real reason for whatever it was, one fact is beyond contesting. They failed to suppress it. What was to be a temporary burn turned into a self-sustaining inferno. And once lit, it became more than a gas leak, a blazing signal, impossible to ignore. Scientists, for decades afterward, tried to explain the reasons for the fire's persistence. The answer was grim and unsettling. Below the crater, the gas chamber was not a pocket, but a complex, interconnected network, possibly attached to an extensive pressurized system extending for miles. Heat from the fire would be pulling up more gas, effectively trapping it in an endless cycle. The more it burned, the more there was to burn. That made the idea of extinguishing it all the more perilous. It could put out the flame and allow the accumulation of gases and an explosion in time, or worse, it might even now destabilize the fragile structure of the Earth surrounding it, causing collapse or the release of unknown materials trapped below. And now, after allowing the fire to burn for decades, officials are suddenly in a hurry to put it out. What could have made them hurry? Who is arm-twisting them? And what exactly is it that scientists detected underneath that prompted their actions? The answer involves more than just Turkmenistan. It involves international teams, secret data, and possibly even the United States. The US knows more than you think. For years, the Darvaza gas crater burned in isolation, an open secret in the middle of the Karakum Desert. Officially, it was a Turkmenistan issue, a leftover relic from Soviet mistakes. But behind the scenes, eyes from around the world were watching. And some of the most curious eyes belonged to scientists and intelligence agents from the United States. It turns out, the US has been studying the gateway to hell for years. On the surface, that involvement has been framed as environmental collaboration. American scientists, working with experts from Slovenia and Belarus, have quietly monitored the crater alongside Turkmen geologists. The stated goal? To analyze gas emissions, understand long-term atmospheric effects, and assess the environmental damage caused by the unending fire. But dig a little deeper, and the story gets far more complicated. Satellite data from US weather and reconnaissance agencies have tracked thermal activity from the crater since at least the early 2000s. But unlike other natural gas flares, Darvaza showed unusual patterns: heat spikes at regular intervals, subterranean thermal shifts, and seismic readings that didn't match typical underground gas behavior. Something wasn't adding up. That's when whispers began to circulate, suggesting that environmental monitoring was just a cover. Former energy consultants with ties to US geological surveys claim that data from the crater was quietly passed to military channels. Why? Because the gas emissions weren't consistent with a single pocket. They resembled something larger, something potentially engineered. The deeper the readings went, the more they suggested that the crater was connected to a subterranean system, not just a natural formation. This caught the attention of defense researchers. If there were man-made structures below, or if the gas system stretched beneath strategic regions, it could have implications for global energy politics and security. Some assert that the US initiated probes with the possibility of Cold War-era Soviet infrastructure being hidden under the crater. Such facilities could include deep bunkers, hidden labs, or weapon testing grounds. Any one of these options is not a far-fetched possibility. There is a long history of the USSR burying secrets. Abandoned nuclear missile silos, chemical storage facilities, even deep underground biological labs, all existed in former Soviet republics. When it was collapsing in 1971, instead of burning the gas off, the Soviets just set the whole thing on fire to erase what had even been revealed. The inferno has ever since acted as a bar and a warning, and the US researchers, geological surveyors, or through covert channels have always been making attempts to get to the bottom of what is really under there. In the last few years, however, something changed. New readings picked up strange data beneath the crater, seismic pulses that did not conform to any natural movement, small magnetic anomalies. A US research group stated in an article that the instruments recorded low-frequency vibrations, something that is usually associated with deep geothermal activities, or human-made resonance. This bit of data vanished from public scrutiny. Only a few clue fragments remain. Shortly after this finding came the announcement by the Turkmenistan government, which has resisted any foreign interference for so long, of a plan to seal the crater. If, after 50 years of inaction, why now? Some say the CIA was putting pressure on it to be stopped. Others aren't really sure. They just say the US is behind it, either to cover something up or to prevent the escape of something worse. One thing is certain: no time has seen this intense international cooperation around the crater. Monitoring stations have multiplied, satellite flyovers have been intensified, and unusual diplomatic communications have been traced between Turkmenistan and several Western countries, including the United States. So what do they really fear? Because just as the plan to seal the crater moved forward, something began happening beneath the fire that no one could explain: the plan to seal the crater. For decades, the Darvaza gas crater was left alone, burning endlessly in the middle of Turkmenistan's unforgiving desert. It was treated as both a mistake and a curiosity, a strange tourist attraction, a harmless landmark, until, suddenly, it wasn't. In January 2022, Turkmenistan's president, Gurbanguly Berdimuhamedow, made a stunning announcement. The gateway to hell would finally be extinguished. On paper, the reasoning was straightforward. Burning fossil gas for 50 years had taken its toll. Methane, one of the most potent greenhouse gases on the planet, was leaking into the atmosphere in massive quantities. The flames may have looked beautiful, but they were contributing to global warming, wasting natural resources, and endangering nearby residents with toxic air. "We are losing valuable natural resources," Berdimuhamedow said in an official statement, "and the crater negatively affects both the environment and the health of the people living nearby." He called on local scientists and international experts to come up with a way to finally seal the pit. The public response was mixed. Some celebrated the environmental progress. Others mourned the loss of a legendary landmark. But behind closed doors, the decision raised eyebrows, especially given the timing. Why now, after 50 years of letting it burn? Just months before the announcement, international scientists monitoring the crater had reported anomalous thermal activity. Temperatures beneath the surface had spiked unpredictably. Infrasound detectors picked up deep vibrations, like underground groaning emanating from the chamber below. Gas compositions began to shift, indicating possible new vent points or changes in underground pressure. In short, something under the crater was changing. But none of that was included in the public briefings. Instead, the Turkmen government brought in a group of geologists to develop a safe and effective plan to close the crater. Their proposals varied. One option was to fill the pit with non-flammable foam or heat-resistant cement, smothering the fire from the inside out. Another involved getting the gas through a vent-controlled routing system so that it burnt inside a safe, closed environment and kept the main cavity sealed off. A third, much crazier idea involved suppression by explosives, whereby a controlled cave-in was triggered to collapse the whole structure and bury the flame under all tons of rock and sand. Every one of those plans had a huge amount of risk involved. And it was not only a matter of putting the fire out, it was also, if not primarily, about controlling pressure. The crater acted almost like a lung vent to the gases below it. In other words, put it out without a sound, and perhaps the whole underground layout was not well understood. It could trigger explosions and sink new holes across the desert floor. Still, the efforts began quietly in late 2023, despite the warnings. A team was sent down to test fire suppression methods. Equipment was lowered into the crater to monitor gas flow and subsurface temperature. However, almost immediately, things went haywire. As per sources that are yet unverified but close to the operation, rather than extinguishing the flame, the suppression foam had ignited it. Malfunctioning instruments, heat sensors peaked well over the anticipated levels. And then, for a span of several days, all the data from the monitoring stations situated around Darvaza went blank. Once again, all was back in communication, and the government announced that the operation was paused for recalibration. But insiders thought that the scenario had gone bad. Kazakhstan's seismic monitoring station recorded a very small but very sudden underground tremor near Darvaza. It had not happened in more than 15 years. Was it due to lowering equipment into the pit? A collapse? Or something reacting because of the attempt to shut it down? Nothing was forthcoming from the Turkmen officials. The international team that was working along with them went off the air. Then came the most puzzling update of all. It dimmed, but didn't die. It flickered downwards, flames receding just slightly, as if to the interference. Not extinguished, not even weakened, just shifted. And when scientists analyzed the gas in the air afterward, they found something that shouldn't have been there at all. What they found beneath the flames. When the first attempts to seal the Darvaza crater began, most experts expected complications, gas pockets, extreme heat, and structural instability. But no one expected what the monitoring team actually found. As engineers began lowering equipment into the pit to assess pressure and map the interior chamber, data anomalies started pouring in. Thermal readings jumped erratically. Subsurface imaging showed strange voids, chambers below the main cavity that weren't previously mapped. It became clear the crater was not just a single hole. It was the top of a larger, more complex system. What they were dealing with might not have been a natural gas vent at all, but a fractured geological structure spanning potentially miles underground. One member of the geological team reportedly described it as a honeycomb of gas chambers, some large enough to swallow a building. Worse, the sensors picked up airflow movement, currents shifting in unnatural directions, suggesting active pressurization, like something breathing deep underground. Then there was the gas itself. Tests revealed the presence of methane and other hydrocarbons as expected. But mixed in were trace elements of sulfur dioxide, carbonyl sulfide, and something even more puzzling: chlorinated compounds usually associated with chemical production, not natural formations. Some researchers believed this indicated man-made materials were present underground, possibly remnants of Cold War-era experimentation or buried waste. The discovery triggered panic within the international scientific group. If the crater was hiding an illegal chemical dump or forgotten weapons storage, sealing it improperly could cause catastrophic fallout. These weren't just rumors. During the Cold War, Soviet facilities were known to dispose of chemical agents in isolated areas throughout Central Asia, including deep, sealed caverns in deserts just like Karakum. But perhaps the most disturbing development came when the ground-penetrating radar picked up faint echoes from somewhere beneath one of the lower chambers, metallic resonance. The ping was subtle but unmistakable. Something metallic was buried under the natural rock strata. Some said it could be equipment, a collapsed platform, or maybe some piping left behind by the Soviets. Others were not so sure. In any event, the formation did not match what might be expected from a standard bit of drilling equipment. Different shape, almost structured. On the second pass with the radar, they spotted something new, heat signatures beneath the metal. It was puzzling. There should have been no heat there at that depth. Certainly nothing sustained, certainly not something that could be defined as localized. But the data was solid. Beneath the flame, below the rock, something else was generating heat. Then came the reports that started coming from the surface crew. Officials in Turkmenistan announced the resumption of operations subject to safety modifications. According to the claims of sources speaking on the condition of anonymity, however, the team had come across something they could not explain, and something they could not discuss. Because as the fire dimmed slightly, the earth around the crater began to change, and locals started reporting things no science could explain. Is the gateway really closed? Turkmenistan claimed it would extinguish the gateway to hell. International scientists stepped in. Equipment was deployed. Foam and sealants were tested. Data was collected. The flames flickered, visibly dimmed. The world briefly believed the operation had succeeded, but that was only part of the story. Satellite imagery taken in early 2024 showed something curious. While the central flame of the Darvaza crater had subsided, new hotspots appeared scattered across the desert terrain, some as far as 5 miles from the original site. At first, analysts assumed they were camera glitches or solar flares, but subsequent infrared scans confirmed the truth. The ground was heating up again. The fire hadn't gone out. It had spread. Locals living on the fringes of the Karakum Desert began noticing strange occurrences. Small fissures opening in the sand, unfamiliar smells like burning chemicals. At night, low, distant rumbles, deep vibrations beneath the earth, like thunder with no storm. Farmers reported that livestock refused to approach certain areas, animals becoming agitated for no apparent reason. In one village, residents described seeing faint glows on the horizon, like ghost fires flickering beneath the dunes. The government responded quickly. Access roads were shut down. Tourism to the crater, once encouraged as a national attraction, was now officially suspended until further notice. The area was placed under heavy restriction. Armed guards were seen patrolling the edges of the exclusion zone. No explanation was offered. Publicly, Turkmen officials maintained that the crater was being sealed in stages, that the operations were progressing as planned, and that the increased activity was well within expected environmental response. But leaked internal memos told a different story. One document, allegedly written by a member of the international science team, stated that blocking the crater might have caused a destabilization of the subsurface structure. Pressure was thus building underneath, with the gas being forced through new conduits. This configuration had now stopped being a single burning hole and turned into a network of fractures, an unstable geology ticking time bomb. But there was more than just that about the geological aspect. Another worrisome event was being closely monitored by atmospheric stations. Late in 2023, the sensors recorded some spikes of background radiation that were above natural levels, but consistent and confined to the area around Darvaza. No formal explanation was given. Natural gas does not provide that kind of signal signature. Some feared buried radioactive material could be in the vicinity. Others speculated that sealing off the crater might have exposed some remnants of an old Soviet experiment. And then there were the sounds. On two different occasions, seismic listening stations recorded rhythmic low-frequency pulses that were deep and repeated. These were not seismic nor tectonic rumblings. These were different, regular, intent. One researcher said, almost mechanical. Some others said it bore the signature of acoustic resonance, as if the Earth were responding to a deep and long-sustained tone. Whatever was happening, it was abnormal. Scientists feared their sealing of the crater would backfire. Instead of putting out the danger, they felt they had sent it somewhere else, somewhere deeper, wider, and infinitely less predictable. It was like putting a cork in a geyser, only to have the excess underground pressure find a new way out. Except that now, no one could see where the danger was being generated. One geologist reportedly stated, "The gateway to hell isn't closed. We just moved the door." And once the flames subsided from public view, the whispers began to rise vocally. Was the crater really just an environmental hazard? Or was it a lid, placed on top of something that was never meant to be disturbed? Because deep underground, something is shifting. The gas isn't stopping. The tremors are increasing. And scientists now fear that something far worse may be rising up to replace the fire. What's happening now will shock you. The fire may be dimming, but something else is waking up beneath the surface. In the months following the partial shutdown of the Darvaza crater, new developments have emerged, and they're far more terrifying than anyone expected. While the public was led to believe the gateway to hell was sealed and under control, scientists on the ground and in orbit have been watching an entirely different story unfold. First came the thermal rebounds. Satellite infrared imaging showed the crater's heat signature reducing, but instead of cooling, heat began rising in concentric rings around the original site. Not just a few hundred feet away, but across several square miles of desert terrain. These heat zones are inconsistent, flickering, and moving slightly week to week. Some have compared the pattern to a pulse, as if the ground itself is reacting to something beneath it. Then came the microquakes. Between January and June of this year, over 300 microseismic events were recorded near Darvaza. While none were strong enough to be felt by locals, seismologists noticed something unusual. The tremors were rhythmic, almost timed, one every 52 minutes on average. That's not how natural tectonics work. That's how machinery operates. Pumps, vents, or worse, something alive. When an independent research team attempted to deploy new subterranean mapping equipment near the sealed crater in May, their probes picked up a bizarre echo from deep underground. It wasn't just empty chambers, it was movement. Low, slow, consistent. The data wasn't conclusive enough to say what was moving, but it matched no known geological behavior. Some speculated it was gas shifting under extreme pressure. Others believed it was a structural collapse. But a few scientists weren't so sure. A report leaked by a member of the team stated that this movement is intentional and patterned, not random like rockfalls or gas bubble activity. They even compared it to biological sonar, the kind which is used to detect movement inside caves or bodies. And then came the most disturbing discovery of all: elevated radiation levels, not in the air but in the soil. Samples taken from the desert surrounding the crater tested positive for isotopes linked to long-decayed uranium and thorium, materials often associated with nuclear decay or military waste. Their presence suggested one of two terrifying possibilities. Either something buried below is leaking, or something new is being generated. It has been noted that the environmental scientists working with satellite data have also reported another irregularity: a sudden increase in atmospheric carbonyl sulfide, an unusual compound generally found either in volcanic emissions or in artificial chemical processes. There is no volcanic activity in this area. There are no chemical plants within hundreds of miles. It set alarm bells ringing within multiple research centers. But instead of a public announcement, everything went silent. The Turkmen government slapped a total blockade on the area. No further research licenses, no new satellite imagery from foreign agencies, and the international scientific team done with no explanation. Their last 3 months of work collected will not be released for review. Some are convinced that they have found something: a buried structure, a source of radiation, or perhaps a gateway to a deeper, unknown phenomenon. One that had been suppressed by fire for decades, but that sealing the crater may have now unleashed. They've sealed the pit, silenced the fire, declared it safe. But beneath the sands of Turkmenistan, something ancient or unnatural may have just been disturbed. If you look closer, it's a story of control, cover-ups, and possibly even catastrophe. Like this video? Smash the like button, subscribe for more deep dives, and check out the next video to uncover another hidden mystery they don't want you to see.